Picture a stage bathed in neon pink and electric blue. The house lights dim, the orchestra hums to life, and every seat in the theater seems to tense in anticipation. Then, stepping into the spotlight, there she is, petite, wide-eyed, with a voice so powerful it seems to ricochet off the walls. That voice belongs to Judy Garland, and it promises to take you somewhere magical. But behind the shimmer of that opening number, behind the carefully choreographed routines, the luminous costumes, and the curtain calls, lies the story of a performer whose life played out more like a chaotic high-wire act than any wholesome Hollywood fantasy. Hers is a tale that begins in the family vaudeville circuit and ends in an unassuming London bathroom, with heartbreak and triumph threaded through every scene in between. She was the star who soared over the rainbow, but never quite found a way to fly home. Born Frances Ethel Gumm on June 10, 1922, Judy Garland was thrust into show business almost before she could form sentences. Her parents were vaudevillians, dreamers who believed that applause and bright lights were the currency of life. Yet while that world might sound exhilarating, it was also bruising. Her father, Frank Gumm, became the subject of scandal in their hometown when rumors circulated that he had inappropriate interests in underage boys. It was a dark cloud that would force the family to uproot and flee to Lancaster, California, leaving behind the battered remains of his reputation and any semblance of normalcy Judy might have had. So from the time she was a toddler, she was part of a moving caravan, performing wherever and however her parents decided. Their act, the Gumm Sisters, spotlighted Judy alongside her older siblings, Mary Jane and Virginia, singing, dancing, and beaming at strangers in an effort to earn a living. Not surprisingly, that childhood was laced with discipline that bordered on cruel. Judy's mother, Ethel, was determined to squeeze every possible ounce of talent from her children, seeing them not so much as kids, but as potential paychecks. There was little rest, very little formal schooling, and almost no separation between family time and stage time. Days blurred into nights on trains, buses, and in cheap hotel rooms as the family zigzagged around the country to perform at theaters and vaudeville houses. Ethel's partner in management, a figure named Geneva Williams, also became a looming presence, strict to the point of meanness. By the time little Frances was all of 5 or 6, she was told exactly how to stand, when to smile, and what to sing. Judy's mother, anxious about her youngest daughter's ability to keep the energy flowing day after day, took the misguided approach of dosing her with stimulants in the morning and sleeping pills at night. Such an extreme routine might shock modern sensibilities, but in the backstage world of vaudeville and early Hollywood, it wasn't unheard of. Adults in the industry often hopped on and off cocktails of uppers and downers to cope with punishing schedules. Still, this was a child. She learned very young that if she felt groggy, a pill could fix it, and if her mind was racing at bedtime, another pill could calm it. That lesson would cling to her for the rest of her life. The Gumm sisters eventually discovered that their last name wasn't doing them any favors. Audiences chuckled or misread it, calling them the Glum Sisters. Seeking a more theatrical flair, they changed their stage name to the Garland Sisters. Then at some point in these early years, Frances Ethel Gumm decided she wanted a name that fit better with her evolving persona. She chose Judy Garland, an identity that soon eclipsed her siblings entirely. By the time she was 10 or 11, she was already singled out for her remarkable voice, a clarion vibrato that could captivate a roomful of jaded vaudeville patrons. And yet, behind that giant voice was a small girl who desperately wanted love and approval without all the showbiz friction. Opportunity knocked when an MGM scout, Burton Lane, caught her performance and immediately reported back to Louis B. Mayer, the powerful studio boss known for manufacturing glittering stars and discarding them just as easily. Judy didn't even need a formal screen test to convince Mayer her vocal talent alone was enough to snag a contract. But if she believed this golden ticket to MGM would catapult her into a fairy tale world of happily ever afters, she was in for a merciless awakening. The studio system was harsh, structured almost like a factory. Actresses were products, and these products had to meet rigorous specifications. Thin waist, perfect teeth, flawless complexion. Judy was only 13 and still had the round cheeks and baby fat of early adolescence. Neither a cutesy child star nor a sophisticated adult. That awkward in-between state made the executives scratch their heads. Where did Judy Garland fit? Overnight, she was forced into a regimented routine more intense than anything she'd known before. She had to attend the studio school, which basically existed on the lot for young stars who had to juggle classes between scenes. She also had to field constant critiques about her appearance. Too short, too chubby, too plain. In a world brimming with starlets like Ava Gardner and Lana Turner, Judy felt second-rate from day one. Mayer even had a hurtful nickname for her, My Little Hunchback, a supposed term of endearment that left deep psychological wounds. They put caps on her teeth to make her smile more uniform. They used rubber discs to reshape her nose. They drilled it into her head that she was a liability if she gained even a pound. So, in addition to the stimulant and sleeping pill routine that had started in her childhood, the studio now introduced diet pills and appetite suppressants. She was barely a teenager, already battling an onslaught of insecurities fed by the very people who claimed to be shaping her into a star. Around this time, tragedy shattered what little stability she had. Her father, Frank Gumm, fell ill with meningitis and died. Judy was 13, reeling from the loss of the man who had always championed her singing, if not in the most conventional or stable way. She threw herself into the only life she knew, work. In Hollywood, there was no shortage of tasks for a bright young star under contract, especially one who could sing rings around her peers. But to her heartbreak, she soon discovered that being singled out for her voice didn't equate to being pampered. The relentless focus on her unconventional looks persisted. Meanwhile, she found herself pitted against another teen singer, Deanna Durbin. MGM tested them both in a short film titled Every Sunday to see which might have the better chemistry on camera. They chose Judy, showing Deanna the door. It was a twisted victory that piled even more pressure on her shoulders. With her father gone, Judy had fewer emotional supports. That vacuum made her especially vulnerable to the predatory behavior of certain Hollywood men who saw teenage actresses as easy prey. In her early years at the studio, she endured horrifying incidents. Older men, sometimes even her superiors, making moves on her. Louis B. Mayer himself reportedly crossed physical boundaries under the guise of paternal affection, touching her in ways that left her nauseated and confused. Yet she felt she had no real recourse. If she complained, she risked losing the only livelihood she'd ever known. The studio system was a machine designed to protect its top brass, not its young performers. In 1939, she was cast in the role that would define her for generations, Dorothy Gale in The Wizard of Oz. Countless starlets had been considered and rejected, but Judy got the part, ironically, because she fit the sweet, simple persona of a farm girl from Kansas. The song Over the Rainbow was at first slated to be cut from the film for pacing reasons, but when the producers realized what they had, a once-in-a-lifetime performance, they kept it. That performance earned Judy a special juvenile Oscar, forever branding her as the quintessential good girl who yearned for a place beyond the rainbow's arch. Yet behind those iconic scenes lay more heartbreak. She was on strict diets to maintain her figure, forcibly strapped into corsets to hide any curve that might make Dorothy look less innocent. On set, she reportedly endured unwelcome advances from some of the men playing Munchkins. Studio administrators brushed it off, telling her to ignore it. Even after the global success of Oz, she returned to business as usual. More musicals, more pills, more disheartening reminders that her worth lay in her ability to deliver a perfect performance. Her close association with Mickey Rooney in a string of backyard musicals only reinforced this all-American girl typecast. The public loved seeing them together, two bright-eyed teenagers tap dancing their troubles away. Rumors circulated that Judy had a crush on Mickey off-screen, but if she did, it wasn't mutual. She ended up tangled in complicated romantic scenarios that rarely brought her genuine happiness. At 17, she fell for Artie Shaw, the charismatic bandleader, but he eloped with Lana Turner. Hurt and feeling cast aside, she soon rebounded with David Rose, a composer still legally married. Their relationship carried more scandal than sweet romance, but Judy pressed forward, hoping at last to find stability in someone's arms. When David Rose's divorce became final, Judy was 19, and they married in 1941. MGM executives were livid. They wanted to preserve her teen idol image for as long as they could. Then came another heartbreak. Judy became pregnant, but the studio insisted she get an abortion, claiming pregnancy would torpedo her box office appeal. Reluctantly, she complied, a choice that haunted her. This was the real Judy Garland experience, under constant watch, forced to make unimaginable sacrifices just to stay employed. She soldiered on, tackling slightly more grown-up roles in the early 1940s, but always under the watchful eye of paternalistic directors and managers who reminded her she was never quite beautiful, never quite glamorous, never quite enough. Her marriage to David Rose fizzled, partly because of the forced abortion, and partly because they were mismatched personalities. By the mid-1940s, they divorced. In that same period, she landed one of the most transformative roles of her career, Esther Smith in Meet Me in St. Louis, directed by Vincente Minnelli. This was where audiences finally saw a more mature, radiant Judy Garland. No false nose discs, no baby voice, no contrived teenage crush plot. She shone with heartfelt performances of the Trolley Song and Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. Critics and fans adored her. Vincente Minnelli, with his keen eye for style, had coaxed out a more confident aura in her, and off-screen, a romance quietly blossomed. Marriage to Minnelli in 1945 seemed like a fairy tale for a moment. Judy gave birth to their daughter, Liza Minnelli, a year later, but the fairy tale had cracks. Judy's addiction to pills, introduced by her mother and cemented by the studio, was spiraling. She had little sense of normalcy. Postpartum depression collided with the relentless demands of new film projects. She was a bona fide adult star now, but the pressure had doubled. One film in particular, The Pirate, brought Minnelli's lavish artistic style into conflict with Judy's fragile emotional state. She checked into a sanitarium at one point seeking respite. Then she jumped back into production. The final product often wasn't a smash, leaving her even more demoralized. By 1948, she attempted self-harm for the first time by cutting herself with broken glass. On the outside, she remained a beloved star with an enviable career. Internally, she was unraveling. Missed work days, emotional breakdowns, and drug-induced erratic behavior made her a liability. MGM suspended her multiple times. She'd be placed on leave, attempt to recover, then triumphantly return for another film, only to repeat the cycle. Summer Stock in 1950 would be her last film, under that iconic lion logo. The studio executives finally decided they'd had enough of her absences and drama and parted ways with the actress who'd once been their prized possession. She left MGM feeling betrayed, worthless, and fearful about her future in an industry where she'd always had the safety net of a studio contract. Her divorce from Vincente Minnelli followed. Rumors circulated that he'd been unfaithful, and Judy's mental health battles certainly strained their relationship. She walked away with Liza, some personal belongings, and a battered spirit. At 28, she had spent 15 years as the darling star of musicals, but was effectively blacklisted by major studios who saw her as too unstable to insure or too erratic to helm a production. She was also saddled with debts as her expensive lifestyle and bouts of unemployment began to catch up with her. For a moment, it looked like her career might simply vanish. Then came Bing Crosby, stepping in like a benevolent angel. He invited her to appear as a guest on his radio show, a move that ran counter to the negative swirl around her. She was terrified, sure that the public had turned against her. Crosby gave her the warmest introduction, telling listeners to remember the brilliance she'd shared over the years and to open their hearts. She sang, and the roar of applause reminded her that people still loved that voice. From that moment, Judy pivoted to a new realm, live concerts. The stage and the direct connection with audiences would become her salvation for the next decade or so. She dazzled British audiences at the London Palladium and then headed to New York's Palace Theatre, where she broke box office records in a one-woman show. Critics were astounded. Judy Garland was reborn, not as a studio marionette, but as a raw, unfiltered performer who poured her life story into every note. And that story by then was heartbreak in musical form. She fell in love again, this time with Sidney Luft, a show business figure who seemed to understand her struggles. They married in 1952, and he managed her career, championing a grand cinematic comeback. That comeback took shape with A Star is Born, 1954, directed by George Cukor and produced by Luft and Warner Brothers. The production was fraught with delays, some caused by Judy's health and others by typical Hollywood squabbles, but her performance was an emotional tour de force. Critics believed she had never been better, and it looked like she was finally going to cement her place among serious, dramatic actresses. She scored an Oscar nomination for Best Actress, with predictions heavily favoring her to win. On the night of the ceremony, heavily pregnant and stuck in a hospital bed, she arranged for camera crews to broadcast her acceptance from there. But the moment never came. Grace Kelly's name was called instead. Judy was devastated. Groucho Marx famously quipped it was the biggest robbery since Brinks. She carried that disappointment like an open wound. Worse yet, despite its glowing reviews, A Star is Born didn't rake in the profits Warner Brothers had hoped for. Overly long, it faced distribution issues, and many theaters cut out scenes to fit in more daily showtimes. Judy had put her heart into this film, and the financial underperformance combined with the Oscar snub left her battered and exhausted. By 1959, her health had taken another serious hit. She was diagnosed with acute hepatitis. Doctors said she might have 5 years left at most. Paradoxically, she described feeling a grim sense of relief at having a ticking clock. At least the constant hamster wheel of performing and pleasing might finally have an endpoint. But her resilience kicked in once again. She survived the illness and went right back to performing, though never quite as robustly. The IRS pounced on her around this time over unpaid taxes, rapidly devouring any money she earned from concerts or TV appearances. She sold her home at a loss, lawsuits and debts stacked up. Sidney Luft also had a turbulent relationship with money, and the marriage grew stormy. They had 2 children together, Lorna and Joey, but that didn't stop the arguments, accusations of mismanagement, and swirling financial crises. Judy turned to prescription medication even more, chasing that elusive balance between sedation and energy. She engaged in rumored affairs to find emotional solace. One such fling with Glenn Ford apparently ended in heartbreak when she sought commitment and he retreated. By the early 1960s, her personal life was in tatters again. She married Mark Herron after a short courtship, but they separated within months amid accusations of physical altercations. Then came Mickey Deans, who appeared in the strangest way possible. He delivered a package of amphetamines to her, disguised as a doctor because he didn't want her children to see. Their whirlwind romance saw him attempting to manage her bookings, handle her money, and keep her from emotional implosion. But the truth was that Judy had soared and crashed too many times. Her body and spirit were fraying with each new attempt at a fresh start. She never stopped performing, though. In the mid to late 1960s, despite shaky finances and deteriorating health, she continued to sign contracts for concerts, particularly in London, where she still had a large fan base. Sometimes she'd enchant the audience with glimpses of her old magic. Other nights, she'd arrive late or in no condition to sing, provoking boos and catcalls. It was a painful spectacle for someone who had once been revered as an unstoppable force on stage. By 1969, she was living in a rented London home with Mickey Deans, whom she finally married. She was only 47 but had lived several lifetimes. In June of that year, she made a haunting phone call to a friend, reportedly singing "People" from Funny Girl, and leaving an ominous note. "Whatever happens, I know you'll understand." The next morning, Mickey Deans found her lifeless in the bathroom. The cause was declared an accidental overdose of barbiturates. An entire world reeled at the news. Her death triggered an unprecedented outpouring of grief. It was as though people everywhere suddenly realized how much they'd taken that clarion voice for granted. In New York, some 20,000 fans lined up for her funeral, paying respects to the woman who had once captured hearts as Dorothy Gale. A woman who, if the stories are true, had been mistreated by the Hollywood machine from day one. The tragedy of her passing felt almost inevitable, given the relentless diet of pills, the physical demands, and the labyrinth of personal betrayals she had navigated. Some historians note that her funeral coincided closely with the Stonewall riots, leading to conjecture about a link between gay fans mourning Judy and the eruption of frustration that fueled LGBTQ+ protests. While the direct connection is debatable, there's no doubt that Judy Garland became, in her death, an even bigger symbol of resilience and heartbreak, especially within the LGBTQ+ community, who felt an affinity for someone so misunderstood by mainstream society. In the final measure, Judy Garland's story is neither purely triumphant nor purely tragic. It's an ever-shifting tapestry of determination and despair, success and sabotage, all woven around one of the most spellbinding voices ever to grace a stage. We marvel at her comedic timing, her interpretive genius, and her ability to belt out a note that feels like it carries every ounce of her life's sorrows. At the same time, we mourn the child who never got to just be a child, the woman whose finances evaporated while the people around her profited, the star who kept searching for someone to share her burdens but often found only fleeting comforts. Somewhere in that tension lies the true Judy, an unstoppable performer, undone by the unstoppable forces that built her up. And so the curtain falls on a life that was anything but ordinary. What remains is the echo of her voice, a sound that resonates across decades, bridging generational gaps, reminding each of us that hope and heartbreak often exist side by side. Like Dorothy stepping onto the yellow brick road with ruby slippers sparkling, Judy Garland embarked on her journey, uncertain of where it would lead, uncertain of which companions would help or hinder her. She faced witches in the form of ruthless executives, flying monkeys in the shape of her own addictions, and a wizard behind a curtain spinning illusions. Yet she kept singing. And we, the audience, still keep listening. Because in that voice, in that raw, unfiltered, heartbreakingly powerful voice, there's a piece of humanity that refuses to die, a piece that says, no matter how bruised you are, no matter how unattainable the rainbow seems, there's still a reason to keep believing in the magic of the next song.